A warm welcome to all who are joining us for ECHO's Mayoral Housing Forum, including Mike Nicholl, Michael Oshry, Amarjeet Sohi, Diana Steele, and Cheryl Watson, who have all taken time out of your busy campaign schedules to join us today, and we really do appreciate that. As we begin, ECHO acknowledges we are in Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Nahiawak, Anishinaabe, Nissitimpi, Dene, and Niskanakota. ECHO acknowledges this territory is home to the Métis settlements in the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived here and cared for these lands since time immemorial. We believe a treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. We hope by recognizing our status as treaty people, it will help us to be good stewards of the land, good ancestors to all our children, and good neighbors to one another. My name is Laura, and I'm the president of the Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, or ECHO, as we call ourselves. ECHO is a collective of local non-governmental associations, individuals, and the private sector. Representatives from the municipal government also participate at the ECHO table. ECHO is a vision of safe, appropriate, and affordable housing for all Edmontonians. ECHO works collaboratively to enhance community life by raising awareness of, advocating for, and taking action on housing and homelessness issues, and has been doing so since 1986. ECHO raises awareness of housing issues for the right to housing through a multitude of activities and actions, including today's forum. We have a few housekeeping items to share. We ask that our audience members keep cameras and microphones off unless you're asking a question. We will be recording the session and posting later today or tomorrow on ECHO's website for those who weren't able to attend. Attendees will remain anonymous unless you've asked a question to our candidates. We have some questions prepared by ECHO members and also have the chat function below. We ask our audience to share any questions that you have in the chat box and maintain a respectful and inclusive dialogue. Closed captioning and live transcription is also available at the bottom of your screen. If you click on more, you can get a live transcript. And if you have any questions or have any concerns, please drop that in the chat as well. I would like to introduce our moderator, Jay Freeman. Jay has over 25 years experience dealing with affordable housing and homelessness in Edmonton. He is the former Executive Director of Housing and Homelessness for the City of Edmonton and Executive Director of the Homeless Commission. Currently, he is a sessional instructor at the University of Alberta's Planning School, a board member with the Affordable Housing Solutions Lab, as well as an advisor with the Rural Development Network. Thank you, Jay. I'll turn things over to you now.
Thanks, Laura, and welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining us today and taking time out of your very busy schedules. I just wanted to briefly go through the format. I know that's already been shared with you, but in any event, we'll start with introductory remarks, 5 minutes each from each candidate. And I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we're approaching that 5-minute limit. After the introductory statements, we'll hear from 5 individuals with their questions, and each of you will have 1 minute to respond to that. And again, I apologize, that's not very much time to answer those questions. If time permits, at the end of that, we will hear from people participating in this session through chat and select some questions from that. And we will close with a 2-minute closing, and they will be in reverse order of the introductory remarks. So I'll begin by introducing Amarjeet Sohi. Moving to Edmonton at 18 years old, Amarjeet began working as a taxi driver, became a bus driver for Edmonton Transit, and involved himself in his local union to advocate on behalf of his fellow members. In 2007, he was elected to City Council and served 8 years before becoming Member of Parliament for Edmonton Knoll Woods. He served as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities and Minister of Natural Resources. He lives in Southeast Edmonton with his wife Amarjeet and daughter Surat, and teaches collaborative and inclusive leadership at McEwen University. Amarjeet, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Jay, and thank you for putting this event together. My association with Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness actually goes back to the first time I ran for City Council in 2004. I engaged with you to understand the role of City Council in tackling homelessness and providing affordable housing. And since then, up to now, I have engaged deeply with many of the partners and many people who work in this field. So thank you for that. I want to also begin my remarks today by acknowledging that I'm speaking with you from Treaty 6 territory. For me, this acknowledgement is not just ceremonial, it has a very deep meaning. I came to this city, this land, with nothing. I couldn't speak English, did not know much about the Canadian way of life, and I struggled a lot, faced racism, discrimination, and bullying. But despite these challenges, this city propelled me to live up to my fullest potential. My wife Amarjeet and I built our lives here. We thrived in this city. This city also gave us the opportunity to give back, to make it even a better place. That is the reason I love our city, and that is why I have always put Edmonton and Edmontonians first. I was fortunate when I moved to Edmonton. I lived with my brother and with his family. Even though I didn't have much, but I had one thing. I never had to worry about having a place to sleep. As you well know, there are hundreds of Edmontonians living on our streets. They have nowhere to go. There isn't always sufficient shelter space or access to housing. There aren't enough supports to help people living on the streets who struggle with addictions and mental health issues. And before we are able to tackle any of these challenges that people in our community are facing, we need to provide them with adequate supportive housing. And we don't have to invent new solutions. Before COVID, we were seeing a steady decrease in the number of Edmontonians without a home, thanks to the coordinated efforts of organizations like yours. We need to recommit to the plan to end homelessness and our housing first approach and readjust tactics to produce better outcomes for chronically homeless Edmontonians. We have surplus of vacant office, mixed use, and residential spaces in Edmonton. Retrofitting these buildings could be an efficient way to create new housing spaces. We should prioritize vacant spaces along transit corridors and near existing services, as these sites would offer residents walkable access to services and businesses. This approach is already proving itself in Alberta. A vacant office tower in downtown Calgary is being converted into 82 units of affordable housing. As mayor, I will work to get our federal and provincial counterparts on board to fund these projects. City administration can do the groundwork now to identify the right buildings and put us in a prime position to receive funding for housing projects.
1 minute.
I also think we can create a better framework for housing development in Edmonton. The current review of the zoning bylaw provides us an opportunity to assess how our current rules support projects like the 2017 collaboration between Westmount Presbyterian Church and Right at Home Housing Society. As mayor, I will gather leaders from various religious, indigenous, cultural community organizations and business leaders and housing providers at the same table to identify opportunities and make the most of our collaborative effort. Having everyone around the table communicating and collaborating will allow us to find solutions to these complicated and intersecting issues, and I'm committed to working with you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Amarjeet. Boy, that was really efficient. Down to 3 seconds left on the table. It's my pleasure next to introduce Michael Oshry. Michael, uh, Michael Oshry's family moved to Canada and settled into Edmonton when he was 7. He has spent more than 20 years building and leading enterprises. One of his first ventures was starting Remedy Cafe in 1990. And in 1998, he co-founded the financial technology company Firma Foreign Exchange, now operating in 4 countries. He was winner of Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and he founded Blue Pen Capital, which assists access to capital for infill developers. He was a member of City Council for 4 years, and as a volunteer, he has coached hockey and serves on the boards of the University Hospital Foundation and Business Link. With Alyssa, his partner of over 25 years, he has 2 children, both currently students in university. Michael?
Well, thank you, Jay, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for being here. And of course, thank you for the organizers for putting this on. I'm going to talk a little bit about my whole platform, specifically, of course, around the housing and homeless issues that we're all here to talk about, and then I'm looking forward to answering your questions as well. So over 8 months and thousands of conversations, what I've heard from Edmontonians is they actually want to keep moving the city forward, but there is a strong caveat, and that caveat is that money is limited. And so we have to work on these big challenges like the homeless challenge that we're all here going to talk about, but we have to be very focused and financially responsible. And that's what I'm going to bring to the mayor's chair, a forward-thinking agenda, but one that's underpinned by stronger fiscal management. We also have to bring private investment into our city to build businesses that will recover our tax base and to pay for all the challenges that we have to undertake. And this private investment is also going to be for the challenges that we're going to talk about today. And so I'm uniquely qualified to do that, to bring in this private investment to address some of these challenges. And I'm going to get to work. And so this is how I'm going to start. Unfortunately, there's always going to be people falling into homelessness. And what we have to do as a society is to make sure that it's not chronic, not reoccurring, and that their time is brief. And so I'm going to push forward an aggressive homeless strategy of the following supports. I'm going to commit City Council, with the help of City Council, of course, 200 extra housing units per year for the next 4 years, $50 million into land and building conversions, and $70 million into Home Ed, which, as most of you would know, is our undermarket housing provider. I also think it's important that we expand the help pilot project that the city is working on. And so I'll be working with the police commission to do that. And then we also, we have to have stronger police presence, but one that really has a straighter line to supports. And people, the way I look at this is people sleeping in alleys is not the best we can do as a society, and we can and will do better. Some of the other things I'm going to be working on that's not directly related to this issue, but does fall into line with it in some ways, is allocating money to a free play program, which will ensure we have free recreation for all kids under 18 every day after school. The most successful communities and societies prioritize children and youth. I'm going to bring City Council together to make sure that there's no tax increase for the next couple of years. And I'm going to remove the city as the lead developer of Blatchford, which, by the way, is an interesting location for affordable housing units, which has really not been discussed at length as much as I would have liked. And finally, I'm going to meet with the Indigenous community, with the elders and the Treaty 6 Confederacy of First Nations, to begin work on a accountability week, where we're going to look at out of the 94 TRC calls to action, 10 of them really affect municipalities. And we've got to stop talking about it and stop talking about platitudes and really move the needle on those 10 items. And so I'm going to make sure that we meet and look at those 10 items every week until we have achieved what we plan to achieve. And then finally, we need to fix the broken relationship we have with our provincial government. Right now, the city of Edmonton is on the outside of every discussion with the provincial government that they have with everybody else in the province, including how we're going to support housing units. And political games and calculations across all levels of government, they have to end. We've got to do what's best for the city of Edmonton now. And, I'll just sum up by saying, this is a great place, a great place to live. I know there's lots of challenges that we have in our society, in our city, and I know we're all talking about this a lot during our campaign. But if you look at what the city of Edmonton offers to the vast majority of people, the vast
1 minute.
majority of the time, it's unbelievably positive and pretty exciting. And I'm really very optimistic for the future. Not everything is doom and gloom as we seem to be talking about over the last few months. And so I'm ready to fight passionately to make sure that we address all these challenges in our society and lead the city to a prosperous future for everybody. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Michael. So next, I'd like to introduce Diana Steele. Diana wants to be the first female Métis mayor. She is president of Crestwood Community League and has volunteered with the Festival of Trees, Kids Sport, Candy Cane Lane. She created the fundraiser Soccer Balls for Syrians and started a committee for grocery delivery to those quarantined or immunized compromised during COVID. She has run her own small business, taught at Northwest College, and developed leadership policies for the government of Alberta. She works with Pilgrim's Hospice and on contract with the federal government. Her education includes a Bachelor of Education, a master's degree in work organization and leadership, and a certificate in organizational development foundations from Queen's University. And on top of that, she's mom to 2 boys, a preteen and a teen. Diana?
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today to participate. My name is Diana Steele, and I am running for mayor of our city to offer Edmontonians a different kind of leader. I have a well-rounded platform, an excellent work experience, and a master's degree in leadership. I did work at Northwest College for almost 10 years where I taught business courses, and then I moved over to the government of Alberta where I developed senior leadership policies for our deputy ministers. And I do currently work for the Pilgrim's Hospice Society. I have been the president of Crestwood Community League for the past 7 years, where I have been on the ground every day listening to the needs of Edmonton citizens. And this is where I discovered my love for community volunteerism and servant leadership. Servant leaders believe in being true elected representatives of the people. It is not about electing me as the mayor of Edmonton. It is about giving a voice to all Edmontonians through me. Servant leaders are the types of leaders we should be looking for in all politicians. Those who listen, understand, and empathize with others and who put our city first over their own ambitions. They behave as true elected representatives of the people. The servant leader understands the importance of keeping people here in our city to dream bigger dreams. We need a compassionate, consistent, measured, and transparent leader who can rally a 1 million person team to make our city the best in the world. And I know I am that leader. These days are long right now. I am running a fiscally responsible grassroots campaign, working full-time for a not-for-profit, and raising 2 boys part-time on my own. I am fiscally responsible with money that belongs to other people because there should be no other way. I walk the walk, and not just during campaign periods, but for the past 7 years where I have been on the ground with our citizens every single day. I have a personal relationship with people from some of the most marginalized communities in our city, and I know firsthand how badly they need a voice. I don't have a headquarters because I make the effort to travel to every single person who wants to meet with me. I will never make you come to me. And most importantly, this is evident in the way I am running my campaign. I am not a fan of status quo. I think differently and challenge old-fashioned mindsets that only result in the same old. I'm bucking the tradition of old-school lawn signs and utilizing technology instead. Responsibly refusing a campaign headquarters during a pandemic, declining the use of swag that will end up in a landfill, and sharing my campaign expenses and donations real-time ahead of the March deadline. My top priorities are focused around creating a strong and thriving city, which encompasses an unprecedented intertwined relationship between the private and public sector, and encourages economic gardening and developing our inclusive voice, where we put people at the heart of the economy. In order to attract and retain our city's most valuable resource, the people, we need to end homelessness, build mental health supports, support families in whatever form you define as a family, and advocate for at-risk or forgotten communities. In order to end homelessness and build strong mental health supports, I will be leaning heavily on the private sector and their social conscience to do their part to help us get our city back on track. I will also be working to bring back our safe injection sites, however I can make that happen. We are looking at quality of life issues here. We have communities of people who are being left behind. I will be your voice. I am focused on making Edmonton into a socially thriving and progressive city that is kept safe and protected by the very residents who live here. I see us achieving with time and the right voice leading us, area self-actualization. I am confident that the leadership I am offering to our city is unlike anything we have ever seen before, and I hope you see that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Next up is Mike Nicholl. Mike Nicholl was born in Poland and came with his family as an immigrant and settled in the Mill Creek area. Mike was president of Artisan Stone Furnishings and assists in the operation of the Nicholl Group with his father and brother. Mike Nicholl has sat on boards, including University of Alberta's Board of Governors, Edmonton Northlands, Fortress Insurance, Front Yards in Bloom, and the amazing Halloween Maze in support of Yes. He was named amongst the top 10 in the Edmonton Journal's Power 30 for 2015. Mike was first elected to City Council in 2004. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in statistics and media studies from the University of Alberta, where he also held the position of student union president. Mike?
Jay, did you say I came from Poland?
That's what my notes said.
Oh, I was born here. My dad was born in Posen. That's great.
Apologize.
No worries. It's kind of like, okay, I'll put the timer on. Well, I've talked about this quite a bit, and it starts very simple. It's not compassionate to continue on the way we're going, and so it is. I'm tired. I am tired, and I'm sure everyone here is tired of watching broken people wander our streets. And that's why we focus a lot on the need for treatment for trauma and addiction. I guess I separate from the housing argument in one respect. Housing is part of the solution. It's not the entire solution. And if we're really compassionate, if we really care about the people, the businesses, the residents that are affected by this issue, then we have to talk about the entirety of the system. And so, yes, we need housing. And of course, different kinds of clients need different kinds of housing. And for example, we all know if you're a meth addict, it's a little different than being an alcoholic, or a person that's suffering an economic fallback. That's a different kind of client. So I get it when we say it's complex, and that is why not a one-size-fits-all answer is going to apply. And so, the stats that just so we get a sense of the consequences, but they're worth saying again. In 2021, the city cleaned up approximately 1,400 vacant encampments who were sleeping rough outdoors, removing approximately 460,000 kilograms of waste and 16,200 needles. This is there's also a very physical consequence, not just to the people, but to the businesses, but to the environment as well. So what we talk about is trying to focus on the treatment beds and the actual mechanic. I guess I am a nut and bolts kind of guy in terms of how we need to deal with the system. So you all know that I brought forward the motion on minimum standards on shelters. And I'll tell you, frankly, it was out of exasperation. I was so frustrated because still today, I'm not clear, right, on how what happens to a person from the start to the end, right? And if we don't track, if we don't measure, we're not what happens to that person or individual, then I'm afraid then we don't know if we're actually having a result for all the money we're spending. And there's no one here that is saying that anyone is doing a bad job. The question is, where do you need the help and how? And that's where what I talk about in terms about building a better system and measuring what we do as we go through. And so in terms of advocacy, yes, there is no question we're going to have to do better. And I also find it also interesting, people talk about the private sector a lot. I think you're missing also the labor community. They have a lot to offer as well. They can be brought to the table as well to start helping on some of these files, and they're more than willing. So we shouldn't just say it's all about the private sector aiding us. There are unions, there are labor groups who take a great interest on this. So if we're going to deal with the spectrum of clients at the front end, it is a couple of things. Streaming them for finding treatment beds. That's part of it. And we're going to have to take them 20 at a time. There's no magic fix here. We're going to have to grind this one out. And so then at the other end, we have what we call the economic homeless. And the economic homeless are ones that need housing quickly. And the question is the system nimble enough to do that? And I know that for some of the providers here, they're frustrated with red tape too, just as much as every one of us candidates. And so it's about clearing that deck. So we talk about shelter safety at one end, because I'm hearing over and over and over again, people don't want to use the shelters because they don't feel it's safe. That's why I brought the minimum standards forward. And then at the other end, I talk about proper housing for the right individual and putting a voucher out there so the money can follow the client, so we can actually measure the results. So thank you, Jay. I think that good that we straightened out the posing thing. And so any questions you got, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks very much. And I was surprised myself that you were born in Poland. So there we go.
We're actually we're actually Germans from Posen, blah blah blah.
Ah, okay. Our next speaker is Cheryl Watson, who grew up in the community of Beverly and attended M.E. Lazert High School. Her family includes husband Jeff and 4 adult children. You look too young to have 4 adult children. She built her career around innovation and strategic business transformation, tech innovation, and small business enablement. She worked with Intuit to work collaboratively with others to build a Silicon Valley tech campus in Edmonton, and went on to be part of the team leading Intuit's global expansion. She joined Edmonton Economic Development Corporation, founded Innovate Edmonton, and co-founded Alberta Innovation Corridor. She is a member of the Downtown Recovery Task Force and serves on the Startup Genome Global Senior Policymaker Forum. And she is a mentor in the Threshold Impact Venture Mentor Program. Cheryl?
Thank you, Jay, and hello, everyone. So as Jay said, I was born and raised here. I grew up on the north side in the community of Beverly, and I think that that's especially relevant for this conversation. I was raised by a single mom, and like 35% of Edmontonians making below $30,000 a year, we were one of those families. And so we were critically reliant on city services. And many of my friends actually, were reliant on government supports for their income. So I'm very aware of the need for affordable housing in our city. And these years were incredibly formative to me. I think about them often, about values and the way I lead. And so in this context, they definitely taught me the very real need for an accessible and affordable city. Now, I had a lot of help along the way, and I went on to have a successful career as an executive in a Fortune 500 global organization. And this really gave me a new lens on my city. I felt like our city really wasn't moving forward in the way other cities around the world were. So I went to work for my city alongside City Council and administration to create our city's newest economic development agency, Innovate Edmonton. I love our city, but I know it can be better, and I want to do more to help. So in October 2020, I announced my intent to run for mayor, to collaborate, to bring everyone along to build a more accessible and equitable city. I want to build a city that works for all Edmontonians, no matter where you live. My platform is built on 3 main pillars, the first being place. We need to create a safe, welcoming, equitable city that serves the needs of Edmontonians. The second is around partnerships. The city of Edmonton right now is in 74 different lines of business. We are doing the work of nonprofits and other service providers. We are blocking socially active business owners from helping to build our city, and we're antagonizing other orders of government. Instead, we need to focus on doing our job well and being a collaborative partner. And the third is potential. We know that nearly 90% of the businesses in this city are small and medium enterprises. Business is very personal for us here in Edmonton, and we need to create the conditions for success for these companies choosing our city to build a business so that they can create opportunity for the nearly 100,000 students in this city enrolled in post-secondary institutions. Now, I've created a number of very practical policies focused on creating a safe, more accessible, and well-serving city. The first is a safe city for women and girls that really calls on the UN Women's Global Initiative that says that if you create a safe city for women and girls, it's a safe city for everyone. The second is around our basic needs policy that really focuses on the City of Edmonton's means and mandate to provide a life of dignity and a better day-to-day experience for those living in poverty and those experiencing houselessness. The third is around an age-friendly and accessible city that really focuses on making sure that our city services are accessible by those in need. But in order to realize this future, we really must deal with what's right in front of us. I've been consistent from the beginning that I will bring a fresh perspective, and beginning with our relationship with the provincial government. It is currently fractured, and yet they are our most important partner if we want to make meaningful change in this area. Now is not the time for politicians' promises. Now is a time for a leader with the skills, experience, and recent very positive relationships with our provincial government, both the NDP and the UCP. I want to work directly with them and you, the community, to make positive change. And if you want change, you have the ability to affect that. And so on October 18th, right around the corner, I am asking for your vote for a city that just works. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move to the next step of our agenda, and that's where we're going to hear from 5 individuals, and they will each pose a question, and you will each in turn have 1 minute to answer those questions. And in fairness, I'm going to change up the order. So the first question, or the first person to answer the question, will be Michael. Asking the first question is Cheryl Cunningham. She's CEO of Nicholl Housing Ventures and believes housing is an inherent right for the peoples of Turtle Island. Corolla?
Yeah, hi. I've liked what I've heard so far, and so I'm going to ask my first question here. What is your position on the human right to house? And what is one new idea you will champion with the City Council that will result in more good housing for people with low income in Edmonton?
Michael?
Well, of course, I agree with the housing. Human right. Housing is a human right, so I think that's not even up for debate. So we'll start there. I'm going to answer the question about the new housing ideas slightly differently. I'm looking at a lot of preventative work, which we haven't really talked about. And so I've got a plan for social procurement where we can get the City of Edmonton to partner with all the big construction companies to train up workers. So they start off at $15 an hour or whatever, and by the end of their 3 years, they're making $40 or $50 an hour. So we can take people out of poverty and out of the housing need. And so I've got sign off from Clark Builders and Ellis Don and PCL and others to do this. And so that's sort of some of the ideas that I'm coming up with, is how we can leverage different partners to work on preventative as well as some of these housing challenges that we're all talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana?
International human rights laws recognize that everyone has a right to an adequate standard of living, which includes adequate housing. And we are falling short here. This is unacceptable to me. Every person in our city should have access to housing, should they want it. As for a new idea, we have a lot of land, as Michael Oshry has mentioned earlier, so we need to explore that as a possibility. And I would just like to work with your agency and all of the agencies around Edmonton who are doing good work, find out what they require, and once I have an opportunity to listen and learn, that's when my out-of-the-box thinking will begin, and I will come up with some really incredible ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Mike?
Well, it's good to hear Michael talk about social procurement. That idea originally came from IBEW almost 2 years ago, when they were talking about getting contractors to get better social return on investments with regards to procurement from the city. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about, yes, housing is a right, but let's talk about Indigenous housing and Indigenous needs. Not all the clients are the same. They need to be customized for the experience that needs to be dealt with in a more compassionate side. And so I think this is kind of where the focus has to be. We have to get back to the nuts and bolts. I did call for a voucher program, so we have a little more speed to market for some of the economic homeless that we have, like a vet coming back from Afghanistan, so he could get a voucher and go get something out of Boardwalk, because it is about speed in some of this for some of these clients. But at the end of the day, it is turning around to you and saying, okay, what are your specifications? What are your projects? What are the nuts and bolts of it to get it off the ground? And that's the simple drive of it. We all want to develop performance that deliver for the client. So I don't think anyone's going to argue that. The question is, who's going to push it? And I think I'll push it quite hard. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl.
I call this out in my basic needs policy and talk about land and advocacy to support housing. This is a critical need. The first idea we propose is to provide a discount to purchase some of our city lands or building assets, and offer this opportunity to either community hub service providers or other nonprofit organizations who want to build affordable homes. We also believe that there's an opportunity for us to match provincial and federal housing grants with city land. And then the third is we know that many voices really help with advocacy in this area. And we want to provide Edmontonians and service providers working in this area with the tools and means to help advocate for these issues. So almost like an advocacy toolkit.
Thank you. And Amarjeet.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Cheryl for inviting me to take a tour of the Nicholl housing project, as well as inviting me to the Ambrose house for September 30th Indigenous Reconciliation Ceremony. I have engaged deeply with Indigenous communities, and I firmly believe that housing is a right, absolutely a human right. But also housing is tied to reconciliation. We can't really truly be a city dedicated to reconciliation if we are unable to tackle issues of homelessness. Absolutely, right? And my commitment is very deep. And the second part is my proposal to create the mental health framework. Calgary has done it. We need to do it the same, because mental health, addiction, and homelessness are tied together, and we need to have a more holistic approach to tackling that.
Thank you.
One more thing, very important thing, Jay, I want to mention. My philosophy to Indigenous engagement is rooted in what I have been told and advised by Indigenous leaders, is that nothing for them without them. And I firmly believe in that philosophy.
Thank you. So our next person posing a question is Dalmy Garcia Hoyt. She's a social worker serving as housing intake and referral coordinator of Boyle Street Community Services. Dalmy?
Yes, I'm here.
If you want to pose your question.
Yes, I'm going to introduce Jeremy, and he is our one of the workers from Higher Good program here at Boyle Street Community Services, and he will be the one reading the question.
How are you today, sir?
Good.
Okay, so the main question is, what are the main barriers to creating sustaining and adequate supply of affordable housing? And how do you propose to address these barriers?
Thank you. We'll start with Diana.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So some of the barriers are land use policies, zoning regulations, density limits, height restrictions, parking requirements, lengthy permitting and approval processes, and then also community opposition as well. We have a lot of not in my backyard, and all of these contribute to the issue. We need to work with builders to change some of their regular practices. We need to change our approval processes by removing lengthy wait times and red tape. And we need to work with all communities to end the not in my backyard perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, if I can go to you.
Well, Diane has hit most of it, so I'm not going to repeat what she said. That was a pretty good answer that she had from a macro perspective. But really, at the end of the day, if we want to build wider coalitions and get more money into the system, it is about identifying those treatment paths. What happens when a person bumps into the system, and then taking that case forward to the province to demonstrate social return on investment. I'll give you one example. Every time a homeless person enters one of our emergency wards, right, which happens, it's $1,000 to create the chart. That's what I've been told. So they do that 2-3 times a week, for example. All of a sudden, it starts to add up pretty quickly. And once you understand those numbers, once you track what happens and the cost centers that there are, then you discover that these treatment beds make a lot of sense. So because it is about getting them to where they need to be into treatment for trauma and addiction.
Thank you. Cheryl.
The question was around what's preventing the adequate supply of housing, affordable housing. And I believe that land is a big barrier right now. And land in the neighborhoods that need affordable housing within it. And so I point to the Blatchford lands, I point to the exhibition lands, and a number of abandoned lands that the city owns within neighborhoods. My own old junior high, Lawton Junior High, is now land that is not being used by the community. And I think that that's our biggest opportunity, is to really give these lands back to community and allow them to be built on so that we can create more affordable housing in the neighborhoods that need it the most.
Thank you. Amarjeet?
When I was a federal minister of infrastructure, I worked with communities to set up the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness in Canada. Now that plan is providing federal support. We also need to take leadership at local level. And I talked about surplus schools, surplus land. I talked about retrofitting the surplus buildings and creating more affordable housing by doing that. But we also need a provincial partner. It is so disappointing to see that this UCP government has not fulfilled its responsibility to Edmontonians in many aspects on COVID, and then COVID has impacted the vulnerable people the most. They have not fulfilled their responsibility on housing, on mental health, and they're clawing back funding on supervised consumption sites. We need a leader in the city that is able to work with all these governments, at the same time hold them to account and not be afraid to stand up on behalf of Edmontonians and on behalf of vulnerable Edmontonians particularly. And I'll do that by building a coalition of community leaders, people like you from the business and everyone, talking to this province in one voice, that investing in Edmonton should matter to them.
Thank you. And Michael.
With the last provincial budget, the City of Edmonton's, through the Mayor's office, number one ask of the provincial government was $5 million to run affordable housing units. And as we all know, the $5 million on a provincial budget is a rounding error of a rounding error. And that was turned down. And it was turned down for obvious political gamesmanship. And currently the City of Edmonton, I'll say, how can I put this without saying anything inappropriate? I'm pretty straightforward, as you know, but we've got some poisoned relationships with our provincial government. And I'm the only candidate that doesn't have any partisan relationships with our provincial government, and we've got to work with whoever happens to be in there. So whether it's our current government or another one, we've got to find 2 or 3 things that we have in common, get some wins for everybody to actually have Edmonton get a seat at the table, and then get some funding for these sorts of challenges. And going forward, the provincial government is going to work with who they want to work with, and the City of Edmonton is being shut out. And so that's number one. The second issue is around the City of Edmonton itself. my view is the city of Edmonton's government has to be, they have to go to all entities. So whether it's a housing entity or a nonprofit, a cultural group, a business, and say, what do you want to do here? What do you want to build, and how can we help you? And right now, it's this reverse top-down approach, and we really have to change the mindset to let people do what they want to do within the rules, of course, and be an enabler, which we aren't locally right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person, the question is Lynn Hanley. Lynn was one of the founders of the Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness and leads the work of Communitas, supporting housing organizations and co-ops develop major projects. Lynn?
Okay. Basically, my question is, how can the city protect existing housing and yet support the rehabilitation of housing that is deteriorating? And how can it support the development of infill housing that complements existing neighborhoods, promotes cultural inclusion, accessibility, and improved quality of life without increasing the cost of the housing?
That's a mouthful. Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's quite a bit there, Lynn. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, we can start from the top and work our way back. First of all, it is about the overall tax burden with regards to everybody, not just this file, but other files. When I have pensioners who can't afford to stay in their homes because the cost of staying in that home is too high, we have a material problem. So we have to deal with core services and roll taxes back, which means the city has to focus on its priorities. And then as we move down the pipe, we want to talk about inclusive housing and zoning on infill that's within community context. This is how you build more support. The problem we're having with our zoning system and our processes is it's a show and tell kind of game, and there's a lot of fixed costs that are being driven in there to the developer, let's say a fire hydrant or this sort of thing, that makes a lot of the kind of development you want, Lynn, very, very difficult. That's part of cutting the red tape. And then it's just transparency, straight up transparency for a lot of these neighborhoods and a lot of these issues. If the community knows what's happening, and that's not what's happening right now, there's a lot of gray. Once we get that transparency, I'll talk about Richie and Cisco. Once they knew it was coming, they accepted that site as a temporary shelter. So that's kind of my approach on it. But there's a lot to unpack there.
Indeed. Cheryl?
Have big ideas around the first part of the question. I'm actually very curious to hear from this community about ideas that they have. So maybe what I'll do is I'll focus on the second part of the question is around infill, because we know that this is so important for neighborhoods to continue to evolve, continue to thrive, and for us to continue to take advantage of infrastructure investments that were made in the past. And so what I've seen other cities do, which is very interesting, is really incentivizing infill development in some of our older communities or communities that require revitalization or more affordable housing options. And so I think that that's a very interesting idea that we should explore, because we know that infill right now costs developers a lot more money. There's a lot of more unexpected costs. And so if we want to encourage infill in some of our communities to achieve some of these objectives, I think that we really need to think about how we can encourage that.
Thanks very much. Right on the mark. In terms of time, I mean. Amarjeet?
Yeah, I think we also need to lead by example and check the history of leaders, whether they have led by example when it comes to infill, when it comes to using surplus sites. I was one of the biggest proponents of turning surplus school sites into affordable housing, first-time home buyers program. I worked with communities to deal with their concerns, but I was also very firm that we need to create housing choices. I think we need to have a compassionate approach, but we also need to be very firm what we need to achieve as a city. Infill is expensive. We need to make it affordable. And there are issues around upfront cost that I will work with the industry to ensure how we tackle those upfront costs. And then there are issues of permitting. and inspections. I have proposed guaranteed timelines for permits and inspections and business license. And also I have proposed one-stop shop where infill developers will go and get the support as quickly as possible without running around wasting resources and time. And we need to use of I also proposed the creation of the energy retrofit program that will allow old buildings to convert into new use and possibly affordable housing as well.
Thank you. Michael.
One thing, there's two things I think I'll mention in my quick 1 minute. Number one is the business improvement areas of the city, the main streets, are looking for more housing options, and they want it, and they're asking for it because they want densification. They want people then to use their businesses, and for some reason they've been left out of the conversation. I've talked to most of them, and I've heard that theme. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, and to densify in those areas, and for all sorts of different housing types. So that's number one. The second thing I'll talk about is the private sector. For some reason, the city right now is opposed to leveraging private sector partnerships, and I don't know if it's because they don't want someone to make some money off of housing in this capacity. And I think it's okay if we can have a private sector entity who's looking to do something and they can do it more efficiently, cheaper, better, quicker. Why wouldn't we? And a lot of them want to help. They want to do something good, and they want to get a return on their investment as well. But for some reason, that seems to be a non-starter for a lot of the city agencies. And so I think those are two areas that we should work on right away. Thank you.
Thank you. And Diana.
So I'll spend this minute focusing on deteriorating housing because the stories I have heard are heartbreaking. We need to work with the landlords to ensure this becomes a priority for them because we insist that it becomes a priority for them. Over the course of this campaign, I have met with far too many people who have told me stories of their living conditions or the inability to find appropriate and affordable housing. And how we have let this get this out of hand is completely unacceptable to me. If I am elected, this simply will not be tolerated. I will be looking at changing the current rules and regulations that we have and making sure that we become champions for the marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd now like to introduce Nadine Chalapo. She's an urban Indigenous woman who is an independent advocate of housing, poverty, and mental health with 3 decades of lived experience in all 3 sectors. Nadine?
Thank you, Jay. So my question is, what is your position on the new emergency shelter standards and operating requirements adopted by the city this summer? And what would you do in relation to enforcement?
And we'll start with Cheryl.
One of the things that I taught, well, first, I think that having minimum standards is critically important, and we should be viewing this from an experience perspective of those that are using the services. And so I want to switch over to accountability on this versus enforcement. Is that when we were forming the basic needs policy, we reached out to many of the nearly 60 service providers in this area and said, how could the city of Edmonton be a better backbone or supportive agency for you so that it could be around collective accountability? And so I think that this is really the community coming together to say we all collectively commit to these standards, and then the city of Edmonton really helping to report and provide recommendations on how they can do better, but the community really needs to hold itself accountable.
Thank you, Cheryl. Amarjeet?
Yeah, during my engagement with many folks who are part of this gathering as well as others is that there's no consistency and there's no, there needs to be better coordination as well. And simple things as people, when they come to the shelter and when they leave, they have no space to leave their belongings, right? Or couples are separated to live in different places. So I think absolutely we need to have minimum standards and we need to enforce those minimum standards. But shelters are part of the interim kind of immediate relief. We need long-term solutions to this crisis. As is, in my mind, an ambitious city like ours, a wealthy province and city like ours should be able to tackle homelessness. And we need to have more political will to have engagement with each other, but also have engagement with the provincial government and the federal government, that why investing in people's capacity is good, and why healing people is good, why it saves money for us in the long term, but also why it's good for social cohesion and economic growth and building a better city. And that's what I would like to focus if I get elected as your mayor.
Thank you. Michael.
You know, it's actually nice to have a conversation about shelters for once, but we have to get the province to align. And right now, that is a serious, serious problem. And I've talked about that in the past, and I'll keep talking about it. We've got to fix this relationship with our provincial government. So that's number one. The standards specifically are a good start. And I know Scott McKean, the councillor, obviously downtown, gets a lot of credit. He's done a lot of work on this. I don't agree with him on everything, but I will give him credit where credit's due here. But I do know that the shelter system is not ideal. It's not working for everyone. Some people are afraid of using them. You know, there's issues with the lack of day use. And so at the end of the day, there's I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert. I like surrounding myself with people who know more about me on certain things. And so I do know that there's more work to be done for sure. And this is a big issue that we'll be tackling going forward.
Thank you. And Diana.
So I have read the document from this past August, and I think it's a good plan. I do support it, but we can always do better. In regards to enforcement, I see the next steps are listed there in the document, and I would continue along with those. But I also see that the city admits that they lack the authority to mandate entirety of the standard, and that additional enforcement resources are required. So part of my plan to solve homelessness in the city is to partner up with the business sector. And as Mike Nicholl said, I don't want to leave out the labor industry. If they want to be part of the solution, then I absolutely want to work with them as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mike.
Oh, Nadine, I got to tell you, I was the one who brought the motion forward. You probably are aware of that, out of exasperation. Just a total frustration, because if you don't have a standard of care out across, this is the nuts and bolts of it in the shelter, whatever system you have, you don't have a standard of care. How do you know what's going on, where the money's going, if people are falling through the cracks? So when I literally brought that motion forward out of exasperation, because I'm watching Councillor 7 years struggle with this. I said, we have to get this stuff going. Why are we kicking people out at 6 a.m.? How many times are people fed a day? These kinds of questions. Where's the wraparound services? It all starts with an understanding of the minimum standard, what we are going to do to help these people. And so, yeah, there's province that needs to come in. The city needs to do this and that, and the shelters need to do Y. But at least with the minimum standard, we can start identifying those gaps. That was the point of it. It's not a magic fix by any sense. But at the end of the day, we have to have some basic level of care. It just drives me nuts when we don't have this question of minimum service provision. So that's why I brought that motion forward. So we can get it done.
Thank you. And our last question is posed by Roberto Peterson. Roberto is the executive director of the House Next Door Society, an agency serving for 50 years, supporting individuals with mental illness in their recovery by developing skills for healthy living with safe and supported housing options. Roberto.
Thanks, Jay. Good afternoon, everybody. For my question, do you feel the city now has the correct approach to addressing homelessness, including encampments and extreme weather measures? If not, what ideas do you have to do a better job?
Thank you. And we'll start with Amarjeet.
No, as I said earlier, we don't have to invent new solutions. The housing first approach absolutely works. We housed since 2009, I think 13,000 Edmontonians who were homeless are no longer homeless now, have a place to call home. So we need to build on that. But I think one aspect that I want to explore, and this will be my ongoing engagement with Indigenous communities, is that unfortunately, large number of people who experience homelessness come from Indigenous background because of historical trauma and the legacy of residential schools and the pain they're living through. So what I would like to do is actually have a deeper involvement from the Indigenous communities in our strategy on everything that we do related to tackling these societal issues, and but particularly tackling issues of homelessness, mental health, and addiction, and do it in a way that they are the leaders, that they are empowered to provide that support, and support that includes cultural support and engagement with the elders. So that's, I think, that I would like to build on the success that we already have.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you. I get really frustrated by platitudes. As those of you that know me know, I'm pretty practical and I've got pretty concrete plans. And talking about all these problems on ending things and fixing things without a plan just drives me up the wall. And so, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, we've got to put more money into it. And I've committed to that 200 units. I've committed to $50 million for land purchase, and $70 million for home ed. And you've got to do something about it and put your money where your mouth is. So that's my first view about that. As far as the homeless camps, they're not long-term solutions, and they're only there because we're failing in the first step, which is trying to end chronic homelessness. And so that's why they get there. And that just means that we're not doing a good enough job. As far as enforcement, it's not good for the people that are there. It's not safe for them. Drug dealers and other people use that as a predatory opportunity. And so if we're spending money and resources on housing first, which we should, and all these wraparound services, which we should and will, we have to enforce the camps and not let people camp in the middle of the river valley. It's not good for them. It's not good for the neighbors. It's not good for the city. And so it's not one or the other. We can do both. But we can support people that need help, and then we've got to make sure it's safe for everybody in the city as well.
Thank you. Diana?
So for the most part, I am in agreement with the extreme weather measures that they have put in place, but we are all aware of the stories that we hear of homeless people being removed from LRT stations when it's very, very cold outside, and that I do not support. As for the encampments, this one is a difficult one. I appreciate the shelters and everything that they offer and the people who work so hard there to provide individuals with a place to stay and eat. But many homeless individuals stay away from those shelters for fear of fights or having what little belongings they do own stolen from them. They form their own little safe communities in the city with others that they trust. And they create a little area for themselves, which provides them with safety and belonging and gives them a little bit of dignity as well. But my plan is to solve homelessness and solve it quickly so that we are not experiencing these societal issues anymore, and also work on preventative measures so that down the road we're not falling back into the same traps. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Well, Roberto, you might know this chart. Have you seen this chart about how the city deals with homeless camps? Right? And this is kind of my point. My point is that every step of the way, we got to ask what happens next. And so, for example, on high risk accelerated response, our closure date, peace officers communicate shelter and transportation options to encampment occupants and facilitate closure. Well, what happens to the client? Where do they go next? And if they go to a shelter, is the shelter accommodating that need? Is there safety? Is there the basics? And this is why I keep talking about nuts and bolts. I think it was mentioned earlier before, right? For example, couples have a difficult time getting shelter accommodations for that kind of client. Where do they store their stuff? I think Amarjeet said that. That is a real mechanical problem or nuts and bolts problem that has to be dealt with. And to be quite honest, Roberto, this 10-year plan to end homelessness did not work. It has not worked. And we just have to go to the streets to take a look at it. And I find it difficult, Amarjeet, that you think it has. You just have to drive downtown and it has not. So the real answer, Roberto, to your questions is to come in and start talking about the nuts and bolts of it. And then that's why we start with minimum shelter standards. That's why we always have to understand every step of this process so that we have clarity what happens to the client next.
Thank you. All this talk about nuts and bolts, I'm getting hungry. Cheryl?
The answer would be no, we haven't got the correct approach yet, because if we did, we wouldn't be talking about this to the extent we continue to talk about it, and we wouldn't see the unserved population that we do. I went out the other night on Sunday night with the Bear Clan Patrol into Boyle McCauley, and the issues that they're seeing on the streets every single day, and the many that are serving this community know this is complex and complicated. And we'll still have a large number of community members that aren't looking for housing first. And so we need to figure out the solutions and means for them to allow them to have safety options, to allow them to get the basic daily requirements of water, of food that they need, of clothing, and protection from the elements. So this is a community issue that we all collectively need to play a role in, and we need to constantly be adjusting and saying, is this working? And we need to have the people who are experiencing the situations to be part of the design. We can't continue with these academic exercises from people that have never experienced poverty or houselessness to be designing the systems and supports. We've got great community. Let's listen to them and let's be supportive to what they believe needs to happen.
Thank you. Thank all of you. You've been very good in terms of your timing. So I think we've got time for one question from our viewers. And I'm going to pose that question. Mobile home communities are largely ignored by the city. How do you plan to bridge the gap for those citizens residing in mobile home communities? And if I could start with Nicholl.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I have talked to some people that live in some of those communities, and I totally do agree they are being left out. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because I should just say I don't know why. I'm not going to guess. And so the city does have to step in and assist everybody. And it doesn't matter where they live, what type of housing they are. We've got people from the homeless community that we've talked about all the way up, and we've got to provide supports, and we've got to look at doing things differently. I'm going to use an example that's slightly off topic, but we've got a plan for downtown where we can convert buses that have end of life buses and convert them into facilities that provide showers and laundry and bathroom for homeless population. And that way we get out of the red tape, we get out of where the conversation of where to locate facilities like this and the neighbors complaining and all sorts of things. So, what we have to do as a city is look at just different ways of doing things. And that's the way I would address, any issue that comes up like this that is just out of the norm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Diana?
Yeah, so it's just in my nature to bring everyone together. I am here to change the way the city works. It sounds a little hokey, but I really want us to become one big family and everyone takes care of everyone else. We have lost our way a little bit. So I am here to be a voice for Edmontonians. That includes mobile homes. That includes everyone that requires a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike?
Well, what's not well known is that I worked with Minister Glubish on Bill number 3 that was passed in the House unanimous bipartisan support to give mobile home site users more rights with regards to their rental agreements and their pads and so on. The fact of the matter is they were being treated as a substandard class of homeowners or rentership. And so I worked with the minister to do that, and it passed in the ledge. And that's kind of where it goes. These mobile home sites need A, more protection. B, we need to deal with some of the costs that are being put onto the overall users of the site, like water and waste and so on. Because if we want to keep them there, then we have to drive the costs down. And I'm very familiar with this issue. We worked on it for quite a bit several years ago. So just take a look at Bill number 3, and you can see some of the results of our work.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Well, that's interesting because it sounds like despite all Mike Nicholl's work on this, there's still an issue. So I guess my question would be around how are we holding our current council and administration to task on commitments that are being made? This does not make sense that our mobile home owner residents are not being given the same standards of residency that our multi-resident homeowner providers are having to deliver. And so sounds like work was done years ago, but it has made no impact and improvement. So I hope that we're holding our leaders, elected leaders and officials more accountable to their commitments.
Thank you. And Amarjeet.
During this pandemic, last 18 months has been very, very difficult for many people. And in these challenging times, leadership matters. Leadership that is willing to work together. Leadership that's willing to unite people, not to divide people. And leadership that's willing to rise above personal attacks and trying to tear people apart. I have done big things during my public life. I was able to do them because I deeply believed in collaboration by working together. That is the leadership that I will provide. I take seriously my responsibility to ensure that every Edmontonian is able to succeed, that every Edmontonian feel part of the city, that Edmonton is for all of us. And tackling social issues of homelessness, mental health, addiction, poverty, intersecting issues is number one priority on my agenda. If you give me the honor, I will work with you to ensure that we are making a difference in everyone's life.
Thank you. So we're approaching the end. As I said at the beginning, you'll each have 2 minutes to make closing remarks, and we'll do it in the reverse order that we started. So Cheryl, you're first up.
Thank you. If you want more of the same, I am not your choice. I'm here as an everyday Edmontonian, someone that struggled and worked hard to get to where I am today. I'm an experienced business leader that has built a career on results, not promises. I have the desire, will, and ability to collaborate to create a better city. I've spent the last 4 years working with the community to create the conditions for success for our small business owners, and now I want to do more. I want to build a city that works for all Edmontonians, no matter where in the city you live. Now, someone once told me that they'd never met anyone from Beverly who didn't know how to fight. That's true. So when you think about the city that you want to see in 4 years, who here do you think has the ability and commitment to work hard enough for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Mike.
Hit between Mike and Michael, but we got that a lot in the past. So my philosophy is very simple here. Housing first is misplaced. We should be talking about treatment first, and housing can be a part of the treatment. And so I think we have our priorities mixed up. And I will say it once again, it is not compassionate to let the system continue the way it is. I cannot stand anymore to watch these people who are fundamentally broken wander our streets. And so we have to get back to the nuts and bolts of the system we have before we go out and start pointing fingers at other orders of government, to be quite honest. So at the end of the day, I put those minimum shelter standards as a base point to start understanding the mechanics behind how we're going to serve our clients and customers better. Only in doing so. And the other thing I keep reminding folks, it's going to take a while. It's going to be 20 at a time as we deal with these files. And so I'm committed to do that. I lead from the front, not from the back. I'm not much of a guy who sits behind the desk. So that is my commitment to you and to your organizations. I'll be on your doorstep asking what you need and can we do it better, because it is about getting the result.
Thank you, Mike. Diana.
Elections can be known for tearing people apart. But here in Edmonton, as we face one of the most historic elections we have ever seen, the exact opposite has taken place. It has brought a small group of like-minded citizens who are all vying for the same job together. I have developed personal relationships with most candidates and I will tell you there is a lot of behind the scenes support. This tells me that you cannot lose with whoever you choose in this election. Even after all the votes have been tallied and a winner named, many of us have pledged our continued support to help our city. But if you are looking for a mayor who is nonpartisan, not a career politician, community-minded, kind, compassionate, and transparent, someone who will wake up every day determined to make this the greatest city in the world, then I'm your girl. It is not about electing me as the mayor of Edmonton. It is about giving a voice to all Edmontonians through me. Under my leadership, there will be no community left behind. Let me be your voice. Vote Steele on October 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Michael?
Well, first of all, I wasn't going to start this way, but I think I'm going to. People that have fallen into homelessness are not fundamentally broken, as Mr. Nicholl just said. These are people that need help, and these are people that need assistance and have fallen into a tough spot. And we can't just let them roam around the streets without supports. We also need to deal with the security side and the safety side. I think we all understand that as well. But the question on everyone's mind, really, on this election is who's the best person to lead us out of the pandemic and into the direction towards economic recovery, supporting people that need it, and a vibrant city. And who can lead the practical recovery of the city? So we have to deal with fiscally, with the financials of the city of Edmonton, economically, because we have to drive business success and investment so we can then support these social challenges, and then socially to deal practically with many of these social challenges before us, including the issue that we just talked about today. And then finally, who can lead politically to repair the broken relationship with the provincial government that is just hurting our city unbelievably. And so with my unique business background and with my social conscience and my practical actions and my nonpartisan experience on city council, I really feel that I'm this person. And so I'm asking for your support on October 18th. And thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Jay, for hosting. Excellent work. And thank you for the organizations and everybody else for putting this on.
Thank you, Michael. And Amarjeet.
I will start with where I will close this by referring back to what I started, which is an ambitious city like ours and a wealthy province like ours. If we cannot tackle homelessness, then who will? What we need is someone who has the right experience, who has the right connections, and who has the right temperament, who can bring people together and build a constructive and respectful relationship with council and other partners. We need a leader who can unite us. And I am that leader because I have been a bridge builder and I have done big things through that collaboration, building the LRT, dealing with TMX, putting together a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. Elections are our choices. We can elect someone who will divide us, who will create fear, who will try to pull us apart, or we can elect someone who will unite us. I believe that challenges that we can face, we can tackle them together by working together and build an Edmonton for all of us.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of you, I mean that sincerely, for participating today, but more importantly, for putting yourselves forward for the opportunity to lead our city. I think you are all clearly committed to that task. And while you may have different approaches, I'm impressed by all of your passion to leading and tackling some of the issues facing our city, of course, in particular, affordable housing. So thank you very much.